What's good, y'all? Welcome to Killer Bites. Today on Killer Bites, we'll be talking about the case of Alisha Bromfield. Alisha Bromfield was a 21-year-old woman who was a loving daughter, an amazing friend, and a soon-to-be mother. Her friends described her as the type of person who just made you feel special every time you were around her. Aw, I like that a lot. She was also really excited to be a mother. While the father of the baby wasn't in the picture, Alisha had no problem with that and was excited to bring her baby girl, whom she'd named Ava, into the world all on her own. She was also a few months away from graduating with a degree in forensic psychology, so she was just a total badass overall. A girl after my own heart. To make ends meet, Alisha had been working in the garden department of her local Home Depot for around 5 years, and like everything she did, she was really good at it. That was the kind of person Alisha was. She put her heart into everything, and she was an incredible worker and standout employee. And Alisha's supervisor at Home Depot took notice, not just in a professional sense. Spoiler alert, this guy is the worst. 36-year-old Brian Cooper started to take an interest in Alisha, and when his advances were not reciprocated, he started to use his managerial power over Alisha to intimidate her and force her to do what he wanted. Was HR a non-existent department in this establishment? He would often make her come into work at a moment's notice, call her names, and even throw things at her while on the job. Sounds like a real stand-up guy. Sometimes he would call her into work and force her to miss her doctor's appointments. Yeah, Alisha was still on her feet for hours a day while 6 months pregnant while working at the garden center. Because America doesn't care if your water's about to break on your shift, just as long as you can pop out that baby and be back to work on Monday. Pretty much, Brian would abuse his power and force Alisha into spending as much time with him as possible. Alisha told multiple family members and friends about how uncomfortable Brian made her feel and reached out to higher-ups for help. She did the right thing and reported it to upper management, but of course, nothing was ever done. I really hope a lot of people got fired after this. It's so unacceptable. If I had $1 for every time I heard, "Oh, don't worry about that guy, he's harmless." Brian would also tell coworkers that Alisha was his girlfriend, while Alisha, of course, was disgusted by the very notion of it. Oh good, so now we're just straight up living in a false reality. This is going swimmingly, but Brian would not take no for an answer. He would continue to ask Alisha to go out with him and eventually threaten to fire her if she didn't accompany him to his sister's wedding as his date. I don't know what they were paying her at Home Depot, but it was not enough to be dealing with this jerkwad. But Alisha was about to be a single mother, and she was terrified of losing her only source of income, so she agreed. Damn you, unlivable minimum wage. Alisha's mom, Sherry, knew all about Brian, and she did not want Alisha to go. She'd heard about his behavior and knew this guy was bad news, but Alisha felt like she didn't have a choice. She agreed to go with him, but told Brian they would only be going as friends and nothing more, and they would be returning the very next morning. Alisha also told her mom that the wedding party would be at the same hotel she and Brian were staying at, so that made her feel more comfortable. But she would still have to share a room with him. On August 18th, 2012, Brian and Alisha made the 4-hour drive to the resort. Alisha texted her mom as soon as they arrived and told her that she and Brian had gotten into a fight and that they would be coming home soon. She also told her that Brian lied because she found out the wedding party wasn't going to be staying at their hotel. But a few hours later, Alisha texted her mom again telling her they decided to stay after all. Alisha had had enough though, and she was like, "All right, I'll go to this wedding with you, but after this trip when we get home, there will be no more friendship between us. Got it?" I hope there was at least good food at the wedding. She was not in for a fun night. Also, remember, she's 6 months pregnant, so she had to endure this wedding sober. During the wedding, Brian was furious with Alisha. As the night continued, he got angrier and angrier with the thought of losing Alisha from his life and just couldn't handle it. He watched the bride and groom declare their love for each other at the altar, and Brian had always imagined that one day that would be him and Alisha up there. In your dreams, dude. He later told the authorities that it was around this time that he started having thoughts about harming Alisha. Oh no. When they finally got back to the hotel, it was well past midnight and all Alisha wanted to do was sleep. She was exhausted. I mean, she just got back from a wedding where she didn't know anyone and just got in a fight with Brian. Not to mention she's 6 months pregnant. Talk about a road trip from hell. As Alisha got into bed, Brian asked her if she would go see a movie with him the following Sunday night. Alisha remained adamant and was like, "No, we are not staying friends when we get home, we're done." Well, Brian was so used to Alisha always doing whatever he asked of her that he did not like this answer at all. And he was not used to her standing up to him like this. She'd given in so many times before, but this time she was stern with him. Brian snapped. He lunged at her, placing his arms around her neck. She was already laying down on the bed, so he easily incapacitated her, and she didn't even beg for her life. Instead, she begged for her unborn child. But Brian didn't think of the baby, and he dragged Alisha off the bed and threw her on the ground. He held her throat until she stopped moving. In one foul swoop, he had taken 2 lives. After he was sure Alisha was gone, Brian placed a blanket over her body and a pillow under her head. Then he slept in the bathtub that night. Thanks. I hate it. The next morning, he allegedly tried to drown himself in the bay, but couldn't follow through with it. Ugh, what a shame. So instead, he drove to a gas station and turned himself in. Clothes soaking wet, Brian squish-squashed his way into the convenience store and asked the clerk to call 911. The clerk took one look at the guy and probably didn't question that clearly something was wrong, so he handed him the phone. He told the dispatcher that he'd like to report there had been an execution. The dispatcher asked Brian if he knew who had done it, and he told them, yes, me. Within minutes, the authorities were at the scene with their weapons drawn and took Brian into custody. They were like, "You have the right to remain soaking wet." Why are you soaking wet? What the heck? Ew. Once Brian was in the interrogation room, he told the authorities everything in excruciating detail. Brian told the investigators that he and Alisha were somewhat dating and that he wanted more, but he was respecting her refusal because she was pregnant with another man's child. Oh yeah, because he's such a respectful guy. When she threatened to cut off all contact with him, he said he flew into a jealous rage. The reality had finally started to set in that his friendship with her would be over, and he started to debate what to do. At the wedding, Brian was already planning on the best way to harm Alisha. The detectives asked if Alisha fought back, and Brian said she did. He said she screamed about the baby and bit his finger, and they rolled off the bed in a struggle. Brian also admitted to tying up an ex-girlfriend before because he said he couldn't get through to her and just wanted to talk. Unfortunately, the woman never reported the incident, so he was never arrested for it. I'm wondering if Brian's ex-girlfriend had reported the incident, if the arrest would have caused Brian to lose his job. Moral of the story is to call out inappropriate behavior whenever you can, because you never know when you could literally be saving a life years down the road. But from the ex-girlfriend's point of view, she was probably way too scared to say anything. That's a super freaky situation to be put in. Following his confession, Brian Cooper was arrested and charged with taking the life of Alisha and her unborn baby, Ava. To prosecutors, they thought this case was a slam dunk. They used that exact phrase, and I love the idea of a middle-aged, hardened lawyer using the phrase slam dunk. Yes, with the multiple confessions from our perpetrator along with the DNA evidence at the scene, I believe this case to be a slam dunk. Despite the prosecutors feeling all Michael Jordan about it, they were shocked to hear that Brian had decided to enter a plea of not guilty. So not only did Brian take Alisha and her unborn child's life away from her friends and family, but by pleading not guilty, that meant they were now forced to sit in the courtroom and endure the incredibly disturbing details of how he did it and why. Brian's defense was voluntary intoxication, aka apparently if you hit the bottle too hard, you too can become a cold-blooded strangler. Yep, he claimed he was just a little too buzzed to know the severity of his actions. Well, if it isn't the consequences of your own actions. Classic. Even though Brian wasn't able to give them every single detail of that night, 2 out of 10 jury members believed his defense and the trial ended in a hung jury. You're joking. But the prosecutors were feeling like Mike. Alisha's family and friends were beside themselves. Who could have possibly thought Brian was too tipsy to remember all the intricate details he just gave them of that fateful August morning? Brian had even confessed to the slaying more than once and even stated it was intentional. Yet somehow it wasn't enough. Alisha's mother, Sherry, decided that she would not let what happened to her daughter happen to another innocent victim. So she and Alisha's friends began organizing for change. They lobbied to have voluntary intoxication removed from the list of legally acceptable defenses. They made history when voluntary intoxication was banished as a defense in Wisconsin and 31 other states. It was a huge victory. Of course, Brian was able to use voluntary intoxication as his defense before they eradicated it, but when he went to trial again a year later, the jury didn't buy it that time. Within 1 hour of deliberating, Brian Cooper was found guilty in the first degree of taking the life of Alisha Bromfield and her unborn daughter. Finally, the prosecutors got to say boom, they put it in the hoop like slam and heard the crowd screaming out jam. On June 24, 2014, Brian was sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms. After sentencing, Alisha's parents, Sherry and Joe, created an organization called the Purple Project that aims to help financially support single mothers in need and provide grief counseling and retreats for parents who are mourning the loss of a child. It's in this way that Sherry and Joe said they've been able to deal with their grief. They say the Purple Project has brought more love and joy back into their lives than they ever thought would be possible. And that is the devastating story of Alisha Bromfield and how her parents were able to take their tragedy and use it to effect positive change in the world. This story has personally inspired me to speak up about inappropriate or problematic behavior when I see it and call it out if I feel safe. It's so easy to brush off or dismiss men's behavior with the boys will be boys archaic way of thinking, but on Killer Bites, we respond to that by saying, boys will be men and act accordingly. See you next time.